Welcome to the Retirement Resource Show, the place to come and live a retirement that is meaningful, fulfilling, and fun. We believe this phase of your life is the best time of your life. It's up to you. And we've got the show to get you there. Here's your host, Beau Henderson.
Hello, welcome to the Retirement Resource. I'm Beau Henderson, and this is a place to learn how to not just navigate finances in retirement, but live a retirement that's meaningful, intentional, and fun. I'm here with my co-host, Amy Scruggs. Amy, welcome to the show.
Great to see you as always. We got some good stuff to cover today, don't we?
Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot in the news about the markets, interest rates, inflation. We hear all this stuff. So let's just have a little bit of a conversation around some of it, because sometimes we've talked about this before. When things tend to induce anxiety, fear, doubt, worry, one of the best things we can do is have a conversation. So let's talk about it.
Well, first thing I wanted to pick your brain on is I'm kind of, being able to leave the cave a little bit more and out and about and really seeing what a post-pandemic world is starting to look like. It really made me wonder, how has this affected retirees? Did the pandemic, how did that affect them as far as their retirement planning?
Yeah, one of the things as I was looking and researching some of the data here, what I did see during the pandemic, more than 20% of people in the U.S. planning for or in retirement withdrew money from their retirement plans that otherwise probably wasn't expected, not just normal distributions. So there was an increase in distributions during the pandemic. And of that, here's something interesting, because we talk about planning, strategy, and, when you get closer, one of the things you're looking for is more certainty. I would like to plan to retire in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Some people will tell you next week, right? But I want certainty that that plan is viable. But this pandemic shook things up a little bit. And the number I have is 35% of people change their retirement date, or basically, Amy, they had to change their plan because things out there with the pandemic, whether it's because of the effect on the market, whether it was because the effect on employment, it changed their plan. And one of the things we talk about over and over again is that we need to make sure we're working on the things we can control, because none of us knew the pandemic was coming.
Right.
Right.
Are you seeing some of them change their plan to retire earlier, or are they extending now and when they can retire? Are you seeing a combination of both?
You know what's interesting? 24% of those are actually retiring later. And what I see there happening a lot is they're retiring later because their retirement assets, their 401ks, their IRAs, their assets have decreased 20%. And there's not a comfort level in a declining market to start taking a distribution of 2, 3, 4,000, whatever that income is, right, what they need per month. So for some of it, it's, well, I'm probably going to need to work another 2, 3, 4 years. Now, others, what the number was 11%. So a portion of people are actually retiring earlier due to the pandemic. Any ideas or guesses why that might happen?
I was wondering if it was just a concern for their health, or maybe just wanting to be home and closer to family, but just really thinking, is it worth being out there and risking if I'm an at-risk person, maybe health-wise? There was,
there's some of that, especially with the health and should I be exposed to this? That's certainly a component of it. But what I've seen a lot is, say there was a big round of layoffs, pension buyouts, whatever you want to call it, and when you leave the workforce, especially later in a career, sometimes it's very difficult to enter back in anywhere close to the level you exit. Again, that's outside of our control, being laid off. So maybe if that happened, I've had several people just in our personal practice come in and say, hey, this happened 2 years ahead of schedule. Let's check the numbers and let's just go ahead and see if it's viable to retire. Sometimes yes, sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is maybe if you could work part-time, find something, bring in a little income for a few years, it would work. But that's very real. The layoffs. And the other is, I've had this is funny. This is something people might not think about, but a lot of people were able to stay home and work remotely during the pandemic. The businesses just say, okay, do your job, do it remotely, just get your work done. And I've had people say, okay, now that the world's opened back up somewhat, and if I'm asked to go back, in my case, where I'm from, right? If I'm asked to commute to downtown Atlanta to go to work again, I'm not going to do it.
No.
You tell me I can retire, and I've seen the benefits of not driving, commuting every day,
Yes.
and how productive I can be at home. If the math works and the numbers work, I'm just not going to do it. So that was
Right.
another one. We got a taste of true virtual working for a lot of people that was different than what we've experienced in the past. We're all in a building, maybe in cubicles or in offices, and you have to be in the building, so to speak. So I saw a lot of people just realize their lifestyle. And, sometimes you're thinking about retirement, you think, well, you know what, that hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours that I'm spending in traffic every day,
Yeah.
I'd rather live my life, spend it creating memories, spend it with the people I care about. So I saw some of that too.
Right. Now, I was reading in one of the studies that the pandemic has brought in that there's a larger percentage now of retirees that are uncertain about their retirement future.
Yeah, there is. There was the EBRI, Employee Benefits Research Institute, did a survey. They do an annual survey, and well, it said that in 2021, let's see, there we go. 31%, is it no, 33% of workers and 25% of those retired are now, since the pandemic or because of the pandemic, less confident in their retirement, their plan, their strategy, and moving forward
It was a big
because
shakeup.
yeah, it was a big shakeup. It changed a lot of things. So what might have seemed like, hey, we're going along. Who in the world in 2019 knew anything about a coronavirus or
Right.
what it would do? I remember we were on a trip and we came back towards the tail end of February. I think we were on a vacation in Jamaica, and we got home probably a week before all this happened.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at that point, we had no clue that the world was going to shut down for a while and things were going to change, but it certainly did. And one of the things it did, it impacted retirement. And that idea of being less confident, that's the place we really don't want to be shaky or less confident when we're almost to the finish line, or
Right.
even, and by almost to the finish line, sometimes that's 3, 4, 5 years, because in the grand scheme of things of your timeline, that's not a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's really, really something to take a look at. And I think it's made everyone think, whether you're pre-retirement, already in retirement, what did this change? How did it allow me to look at things differently? And like you've said, maybe change the planning, for longer or shorter term needs. It's really interesting. And I know as we all watch different news networks or whatever our source or online is, there's always those buzzwords out there that kind of catch attention and make you go, okay, what the heck is that? So I've got one for you here today.
Well,
It's our scary word of
the
the
scary
day.
words. I like that. We need to get you to record like what do they call the ladies that do the
I
scream
need to do a
queens?
scream. I can
You
add
need,
a
you,
scream to
you
that.
need to do a scream queens, and that would be perfect to lay over.
Oh, well, we've got stagflation today,
Oh,
bro.
stagflation. Yeah, that is a word that's being bantered around a lot and talked about a lot. And stagflation, it's kind of what it sounds like, right? It's a stagnant economy plus inflation,
Hmm.
which we've seen that. Okay, so
It's weird, isn't it?
yeah. So Q1 numbers we saw the GDP negative or down, and certainly we know that we're experiencing higher inflation or high inflation. The one thing that keeps us from being in true stagflation territory is our employment numbers. We're actually in relatively low unemployment.
Right.
So that's if there's any good news of if we're in fear of stagflation, it's that we're not quite in that territory yet, but there are some things kind of lining up to be there. So that's why we're hearing that word talked about a lot.
So does that mean that we are in the clear?
I wish I could say we're in the clear, but really we're about to see the second quarter GDP numbers and results. And if we have that second quarter of negative GDP, which we're expecting, that's an indicator of a true recession. So we transition into a true recession. That pushes a little closer to stagflation. But again, we're going to see what the employment numbers are and see if we're truly reaching that definition of stagflation. And again, it's just a scary word. All these things are parts of market cycles that happen. Really, it's more important is what are we doing proactively for when these things occur in the market cycles, in the cycles that we go through to be as prepared as possible.
Well, and it's good that we touch on it here because not everyone eats, sleeps, and breathes all of this like you do all day, every day. So for you to bring this information, kind of calm the nerves on it, because these words do get out there and they do cause somewhat of an unnerving, of a frenzy. Wait a minute, what is that? Table talk when you're out and about. And so it's good that we discuss this, and for you to kind of just put the realistic, this is what it is, it's what it could be, it's what we're looking at to come up in the next quarter. And of course, if any questions, you can always reach out to us or put comments in there so we can address it.
Well, and we love our viewers, right? And
Mhm.
and I write things and say things, but the problem with media, right, is that the thing that's going to get the most views, the most clicks, the most listens is things that elicit fear.
Mhm.
And just be aware of that. Be aware sometimes there's that angle, that spin, that positioning to
Mhm.
get you to click, view, listen, whatever way you're digesting, whatever medium you're getting information from. So as we look through, and a lot of times when we define and say we understand it, I mean, did everybody know today that stagflation was a stagnant economy plus inflation? When we start
Right.
defining it, we start breaking down what it means and how long it typically would last and how it impacts our retirement. Sometimes that takes a little bit of the bite out of it, other than it just being this scary thing I know sounds bad.
Right.
And
Right.
and some of the things, they're the same things, the same principles in this environment where it's possible, things we can do. Revisit the strategy. Is our timeline set up to where income we need in the near future for retirement's positioned um, position to not be affected by sequence of returns in the market? Do we have other monies positioned for the long term to help us combat the inflation that we're seeing? Because if we leave it in cash, inflation's going
Mhm.
to eat our lunch right now.
Right.
What are other things we can do? We can kind of bank a little extra reserve, because cash can really help us out when we're navigating some of this. We can pay down debt, especially right. A big thing. Think about this: in an environment where interest rates are rising, if we can put a focus on paying down variable debt, right? That debt that's
Yes.
going to come up as the interest rates come. And I think that's really decreasing as we head into retirement. There's two things we can do, right? We can grow assets to create more income that we may need, or we can reduce our expenses. So that's another thing we can
Either
work on.
way, it's
Are we
going
in
to
a
balance that
position?
out.
Yeah, are we in a position where we could reduce some expenses so that if we get to retirement a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, we're in a stronger position? So all good things to do,
Mhm.
and in an environment, even when stagflation is a possibility. So there's the word. And next time you're at a cocktail party on a boat with your friends, I want you to strike it up and say, hey, let's talk about stagflation now that you know what it is.
And now you'll be the expert. That's
That's
perfect.
right. Yeah, you got it.
Well, in discussing stagflation, we talked about the market. That really leads into a lot of what we're going to discuss today,
All right.
because of a bear market. And first we can go, describing what a bear market is, but let's start that conversation.
Yeah, I think the key is we're talking bear market territory, right? Our market investments, or the market is down 20% or more, is kind of the big definition, or the overall definition of bear market.
Mhm.
It's scary, right? It's scary because no one likes to see their account balances on a statement drop, or log in and
Right.
see it down. One thing to remember, though, when we're in a bear market, that you don't lose money. It sounds counterintuitive, because there's a loss on your statement, or on your portal when you log in. You don't lose money until you take a distribution, till you cash out.
Right.
So if we're properly positioned, and the money we need for income is the money that's positioned differently than the money we have for growth. Because remember, there's 3 jobs in retirement that we really need to make sure we address. 3 big jobs and a lot of sub jobs, right? We need liquidity, we
Mhm.
need income, and we need long-term growth to combat inflation and give us assets for other strategy and planning things. So if we're properly positioned, the piece that should be impacted by the bear market is the piece of assets that we have 10, 15, sometimes 20 years or more to grow and work itself out. And the cycles always work themselves out. Okay. Unless
Right.
it's different this time, but it hasn't been different this time yet, even though we always say that every time we go into a negative cycle, or a down part of the market, where we have very short memories when it comes to this stuff.
Well, because it feels so real right in the moment.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that here it is again. And you're right. We forget to look back and review, wait a minute, this is where it walked through that cycle last time. And I think because of other uncertainties or things taking place right now, how do you see that this time people are a little bit more fearful of it?
Yeah, I think again, it's the combination of things. A lot of times we'll have a down market, but right now we have bear market territory, interest rates increasing, interest rates going up, inflation very high, and then you hear all these kind of subwords like stagflation that we talked about in today's scary words. So you got this combination of things, and a lot of people, again, Amy, that's why I do this show is to let's define things, let's do case studies, let's answer specific questions, because so much of my mission with this show is if we can shift the overall public when it comes to retirement from being reactive, and that's what I
Right.
see the majority of the time. And by being reactive, it's addressing something after it's happened. Right? It is tough today if you were trying to retire this year and you hadn't proactively positioned your strategy so that you had income available and it's down 20%. That's tough. That's reactive if we're trying to
Right.
address it now.
Right.
But if that's where we're at, the proactive thing to do is to address it now. Right. So that's what I want to talk about with that is what are some things we can do now, whether you're in a good position or whether we're not in the position we want to be in, what are some positive proactive things we can do
Right.
now? Number one that came to me with this was cash is king, but too much will make you a pauper. Okay. Let me explain what that means. Liquidity is beautiful. Cash can help us navigate. Now, if you're sitting on cash and the market continues to go down and we're averaging money in or putting money in the market as it's down, we can benefit from the upside. We're in the position to buy when things are attractive. When we have those emergencies come up, when we get laid off, we have that cash reserve. It protects us from a lot of things. Right. So cash is king. But why I said too much right now would make you a pauper is because if we're sitting, and I see this, we're sitting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 600, 700, 800,000. I've seen $1 million in a checking and savings account.
Oh,
Then what's happening is inflation is eating our lunch right now.
yes. Yeah.
So cash is king, but come up with an appropriate amount. And how we typically do that is an emergency fund, somewhere from 6 months to 2 years. That's completely acceptable depending on you and in the conversation and your comfort level. And then planned expenses. And what I mean by planned expenses are what are things we know need to be done or we're going to do within the next year. And the reason I say that is because you really don't have time to invest assets that you need money to write, that you need to be writing a check for in the next 12 months.
Right.
So cash, so a good cash position, but not too good. All right. And the second thing I would say what we can do in the midst of the bear market is take heed of your timeline. So much of the focus is on this investment's up, this is down, bonds are down because of interest rates up. And there's so much focus on the investment. But really what I want to make sure the most important thing, if I can communicate anything, is that our timelines properly set up. And by that, I mean, just like we talked about the liquidity, taking care of anything that we might need in that first 12 months, we also need that first market cycle or first decade or so of retirement secured. So if I need a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month or more income stream coming from my assets, it's not coming from assets that are going up and down with a volatile market, or even worse, going down and down.
Right.
So is my timeline set up for the different jobs? Remember, there's different jobs: liquidity, income, growth. And when I'm doing that, it's left to right. 1 year, 10, 15 years, 10, 15 years plus.
Especially with longevity being such a big play in this.
Right.
There's so much more longevity.
Right. So mind your timeline. So if you've seen things like bucket planning, all that is, bucket planning is a conceptual model putting different buckets with different jobs on your timeline. Okay. A lot of times what happens is people approach retirement and everything's kind of just what they accumulated. It's an allocation in a 401k or an IRA, but there's no really mathematical intentional reason saying, okay, actually I need X amount of this asset to serve the job of my income need.
Right.
So it goes into this bucket for this job. And that's the work, the proactive work as you approach retirement that can put you in a much better position. And you're building a strategy based in mathematical certainty and not luck. Right. And that's what we want to do here. And the last thing is, so we figure out the timeline. Okay, here's the income gaps I have when I add my Social Security, maybe a pension. I'm going to work part-time here. Spouse's pension will start here. You start mapping out that timeline. And once we know what buckets need what ratio of assets and where the pieces fit, then we need to really pay close attention to our allocation. Are the pieces longer in the timeline that have time to growth? Are they invested for long-term growth? Because we can get the advantage of what the market does best over long periods of time, and it's higher average returns over time.
Right.
But that's not the same money that I would count on for a paycheck next year. because I don't know what the market's going to do. That's outside of my control. So I think those are my three, and that just came to me. Cash is king, but too much will make you a pauper. Take heed of your timeline and address the allocation. You see that alliteration I'm trying to work in there?
Yes. Well, have you noticed as you work with pre-retirees and retirees and you lay this out and they really do it, do you notice that there's a different peace of mind that takes place? Because it is scary, especially if someone isn't used to doing this and they just old school mom and dad taught you put it in the under the mattress in the shoebox, right? So as you work with retirees, do you notice that it actually changes their emotional, mental health by setting it up this way?
100%. Remember, when we talk about, just like we're talking about with the media, clarity or talking about things is the antidote for fear, anxiety, worry, doubt, all those emotions that don't feel good. The same thing. A lot of times we just need clarity on what is it you need per month to cover your gap, where do the other sources come from, and when do you start Social Security, when do you start your 401k, when should we use cash, should we use Roth distributions? So clarity around what we need to accomplish first. A lot of times we have no clarity. We're just going to get there and hope it works out okay. That's a lot of people's plan, and that's not a great plan. Right? That's luck. So one, clarity on what it need to be. And then as we start saying, okay, this is why this ratio of my assets is allocated here for this job and this for this job, then there's clarity around why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when you can say, I have a strategy for retirement, I understand it, understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. It'll make you more confident moving forward. And that's usually the 3 yeses as we're going through a process with a client. We say, we know where we need to be, no matter how long it takes. When we get to the 3 yeses, I have a strategy specific to me and my household. No rules of thumb. I hate rules of thumb. Everybody has different puzzle pieces, different variables, different times they want to retire, different pensions, different assets. There's no rules of thumb.
It's totally different. It's everyone's portfolio and their story and their reasons and their needs are completely different from the next person.
And that's why if you hear advice, you'll see it a lot because it's easier to write in generalities or speak in generalities. But if you hear from a professional, and this is a good clue if you're trying to, another question I get asked a lot is, how do you find the right financial advisor? If you hear rules of thumb, well, everybody in your situation should have a 60-40 portfolio, or everybody should have this annuity, or everybody should do this or that. Run, absolutely run, because it all depends. Some people have a $15,000 income they need to replace. Some people have no income gap. Some people have a $3,000 income gap. That determines the ratio.
Completely.
It's not a random. It's just like the increases in Social Security. They've been very high cost of living adjustments, but they're really, why that's happening. It's a factor of the high inflation we're having. That's the formula. It's an inflation-based formula. So all that to say is the same thing is anything we're experiencing, it's a formula of us building this the right way. And what are we really trying to accomplish?
Right. It's good stuff.
So that's it. We talked about some scary stuff. We talked pandemic, we talked bear market. You even brought in the scary word stagflation. That kind of surprised me a little bit. But these are the conversations, and it might not sound like, hey, I want to go and talk about these negative things, but really, I guess that's what people talk about all the time.
Well, it helps to be preventative. It's still okay now that information is power, which is, and one thing we love to do to even take it that next level is sharing real stories of real people. And I know that you have some good stories of maybe some best case scenarios that you've seen and some worst case scenarios that you've seen. So I think you have one for us today, don't you?
I've got a best and worst for you.
All right.
Okay, this is so serious. I'm going to switch to the dramatic camera angle over here. Okay,
I need to do that.
Okay, so this story, this is a best and worst. The worst is, I'll tell you a story. This is a lady that came to one of our retirement educational workshops in North Metro Atlanta, and the situation she shared with us that her husband, her spouse, had passed away. This is a Social Security optimization retirement strategies class. Her husband had passed away when they were both 43 years old, and she was now 63. Okay. And she was very open and honest and pretty vulnerable in sharing. She basically shared with us, she was at a place working a very manual job for very little bit of money, and she was kind of emotionally, physically, and financially struggling. She's kind of worn out. And we went through the Social Security optimization class. And one thing that came up when we talked about survivor benefits and how they worked, the light bulb went off for her, because what happened when she was 43 and her spouse died, she called Social Security Administration and asked, is there a spousal benefit for me? And they said no. And this is the problem sometimes that comes up with calling Social Security Administration, because they might answer your question, but they're not necessarily going to give you other details.
Right.
So true, she wasn't eligible at 43, but you are eligible for a survivor benefit, a survivor benefit at age 60, as early as age 60. So when she heard that at 43, 20 years ago, she just assumed they were too young, didn't have enough credits. There was nothing there for her.
Oh.
So we were going through the rules, going through the class. And what I urge people is, when we're going through optimization of Social Security and we're learning that, all you really need to know, what you want to be the expert on, is what applies to you and your household. Those are the rules you want to make sure you know. And one of the things that came from that was how the survivor benefit works. And I'll never forget, a couple days after the workshop, she called me crying from Social Security Administration, saying that she just found out that she's going to be able to turn on a $2,500 a month survivor benefit.
Oh, wow.
So for her, it's not the sexiest number of all the examples I have.
Life-changing for her.
It was one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful story I've seen, because it tripled her income, changed her life, put her in a different position. And the thing that will always stand out to me is that she reminded me that if I didn't come to the class, if I didn't learn the things I learned, I would have lived the rest of my life without that benefit that I was eligible.
You wouldn't have even known, because they don't reach out and tell you, hey, by the
No,
way, you're
no,
eligible today. Would you like to use this?
Right. Social Security, you can't count on Social Security Administration. They're not going to call you up and say, hey, there's $2,500 available if you want to turn it on. She learned the
had already
rules.
a couple years of it.
That's right. That's right. Well, she was able to turn it on at that point and got
Right.
the benefit based on her age now.
Yeah.
But that was the big takeaway for me. I would
Wow.
live the rest of my life without that benefit I was entitled to if I didn't learn the rules. And this isn't about me teaching it to her. It's about she showed up, learned the rules. And that's what it takes. You know, we talk about that statistic a lot. 96% of people in this country don't claim the benefit that gives them the most over their life expectancy. But it's because there's no easy access to the rules. And short of you researching, you going to class, you reading books, asking questions, tuning in here, I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have. So it's our responsibility. It's my responsibility. It's your responsibility to get it right. So the best and worst of that, the worst was she was struggling and kind of in a rough situation and really didn't have any hope that there was any relief.
Right.
So that's the worst. The best is once she showed up, learned the rules, it literally changed her life, tripled her income, and she's in a much more comfortable, better situation moving forward.
Wow.
So I consider that both a best and worst. Bad things that can happen, but there's a lesson there that it can change. And you just got to show up and be responsible for your outcomes, what applies to you, and don't count on anybody. Don't count on the government. Don't count on your financial advisors. Don't count on yourself to know the rules to what applies to you, because sometimes you're the one that's going to be the only person that can make it happen. So
powerful.
Yeah.
Wow. Great stuff.
So that's my best and worst. Now I love that. And that story, I think that is my favorite story of hundreds of stories over the years that it was a big benefit. But that being said, that story's not uncommon. There's variations of stories like that all the time that we see. And a lot of times it's just little things or little rules or being told you should do this rule of thumb, or being told that what your coworker, your brother-in-law or neighbor told you should do is the thing you should do. And even if it is the thing they should do, which probably they don't know, doesn't mean it applies to you or your household at all.
Right.
So proactive. That's the drum we're beating today, right? Be proactive.
Information is power.
That's it. This is your money, your life savings, your household, your family. Do it. Put yourself in the best position possible when the transitions of life inevitably come. And that can free us up. Again, we're talking about building a retirement based in mathematical certainty, not luck. What that does is that frees us up from all those negative emotions we talk about to get to the end goal, which is what this show is all about. Live a retirement.
It's meaningful.
It's intentional, meaningful, and I'm going to add a lot of fun.
Yes.
So, Amy, I think that's a great way to wrap up the show.
I think it is. You brought some incredible information to all of our viewers and all of our listeners today.
All right. So guys, let me know, what is it you would like? What kind of experts would you like to hear? What questions do you have? We'll make sure we work it into a show. We'll add it to the agenda. This show is for you. This show is for your retirement to be everything you want it to be, everything you hope it to be, a resource like we talked about for you to get information you can trust. Whether it's from me or I need to bring somebody on to provide it, that's another area outside of my realm. We're here for you. Let us know what you need, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same place, right here on the Retirement